You're golden, you're so golden. What you got, you're the golden child. I see forever between you and me, forever between us.
Welcome back to the Black in Real Life Podcast. It's your girl, Anuli, here with another episode. There are just 2 more episodes left in Season 2, including the episode you are listening to now. Today's guest is Jewel Wicker. Jewel Wicker is an award-winning reporter and podcast host. She is an Atlanta native who has written for publications such as The New York Times, GQ, NBC News, Teen Vogue, Atlanta Magazine, and more. In 2021, Jewel was awarded an Ambie and Rebby for her work as a co-host and writer on a Crooked Media/Tenderfoot TV political podcast, Gaining Ground, The New Georgia. She has been an Atlanta Press Club board member since 2017, where she worked on programs and intern placements. Jewel has also worked as a staff reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Patriot News/PennLive.com in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. In this episode, we talk about Jewel's childhood in Atlanta, her career trajectory, and her overall thoughts on the state of the American journalism industry as an Atlanta-based reporter. My conversation with Jewel took place last summer, and since then she has started a new role as the editor-at-large for Capital B's Atlanta newsroom, in addition to her freelance work. Capital B is a newly launched nonprofit local and national news organization focused on delivering high-quality local news to Black Americans across the country. Given Jewel's commentary about the media industry during our conversation, it makes sense that she would take on this role. Congrats, Jewel. Remember, at the end of each interview, I will come back to share a few key takeaways that stood out to me from our conversation. These takeaways will be supplemented with research from both academic and non-academic sources to add further context to the subjects that were brought up in the interview portion. For every episode, I will include citations to the reference materials I mentioned, as well as some additional background reading for you on the Black in Real Life website. Visit www.blkirl.com to nerd out. Okay, now without much further ado, let's get into my conversation with award-winning reporter and podcast host, Jewel Wicker. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because you are an experienced Atlanta-based writer. You're a native of Atlanta, and it seems like you take a lot of pride in being from Atlanta. So I do want to talk a bit about just your experiences as a writer that's still in Atlanta and whether or not you've ever felt pressure to leave Atlanta for your career, LA, New York.
It's a good question. I have not. So I actually started my career, although I'm from Atlanta. When I graduated from college, I attended college in Atlanta as well. And when I graduated college, I moved away. And so I spent the first year and a half of my career actually outside of the city. Because I was taught that's what you do when you get into journalism. You go to a smaller market and you get experience there, and then you build up. And so I don't think that early in my career, I ever even imagined that I would be able to be in Atlanta doing this job. I just don't think I had really considered it. And so I was living in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for about a year and a half. And I knew I wanted to get a new job in journalism, quite frankly, but I didn't imagine that a job in Atlanta would come available. I didn't imagine myself I certainly didn't think I could be a freelancer.
Why is that?
Because Atlanta is considered in journalism a top media market. And I was had only been, when I applied for the job at the AJC, it was right at the year mark of when I had started working in Harrisburg. So at that point, I had a year of experience post-college. And so I just thought I have to go through a lot more smaller markets before I can even work my way up to get into a place like Atlanta. And so when I got approached to work at the AJC, I was really, quite frankly, pretty surprised. And it never even occurred to me that I would be able to get a job like that. And shortly after moving back home and working at the AJC, I went freelance. And I've been freelance for 4 years now. And I don't know why, but I don't think I ever considered that I would have been able to, one, move back to Atlanta so quickly, and two, be a freelancer covering the city for national publications in this way. It just really hadn't crossed my mind.
But was that, like, in an ideal world, was that the goal you wanted to have, to stay in Atlanta and to work from Atlanta?
Yeah, I mean, I loved home. I think I was open to moving because I thought I had to be.
Okay.
But I think I always, from the time I left, was extremely homesick and missed Atlanta. And when I think of places like New York or LA, they're great, but they just don't feel like home to me. And I think I always kind of felt like it sucked that I was in a career where maybe I wouldn't be able to be in my hometown.
What is home to you? What does that mean for you?
I grew up in Atlanta in a predominantly Black neighborhood. Tayari Jones, which is a good friend of mine, but she's also an amazing author. And she once wrote about Cascade Road, which is a stretch of land that she and I both grew up on. Mm-hmm. And she says anything you can imagine a Black person doing, they're doing on Cascade, right? And so it is a part of town where Black people are struggling, but Black people are also extremely successful. A lot of our Black mayors and politicians come from there. Hank Aaron used to live off of Cascade. All of these really prominent figures, when you think about Atlanta, have spent some time on this stretch of road in Southwest Atlanta in particular. And I think that opened my mind up to being able to imagine myself in different careers and doing different things in a way that maybe some of my Black colleagues that grew up with white teachers, or they grew up in predominantly white schools, or they didn't grow up kind of with this access to upward mobility. Mm-hmm. Maybe they weren't able to imagine themselves in some of these, in some of these different roles. People are like, well, how old were you when you had your first teacher, or Black teacher, or how old were you when you saw the first Black journalist? And I'm like, I was like 4 when I remember seeing, Monica Kaufman or these Black anchors on television and things like that. It always seemed accessible to me in a way that I think I took for granted until I moved somewhere where that wasn't the case. When I moved somewhere where there weren't a lot of Black people, and I was like, oh my God, like I took for granted the fact that my experience as a Black Atlantan was not the experience of other people. And I think that, mixed with the proximity to entertainment and culture that we had here, being able to just love a diverse range of music, because I could go to any show I imagined going to was coming through Atlanta. And the fact that all of my family lived within 5 minutes of each other in this little part of Southwest Atlanta, I think that just made me really love my experience of growing up here and made me really fond of wanting to tell these unique stories.
I feel like just hearing about your experience growing up, I have to ask you now 2 questions based off that. One is, what hospital were you born in? Because apparently that's a thing here.
It's a thing. I was born in DeKalb Medical, which is actually in Decatur. It's so funny because I grew up, my parents divorced when I was 2 years old, and I moved to Southwest Atlanta and lived in Southwest Atlanta until I graduated from college. But prior to that, I lived in Decatur, which is Metro Atlanta, and was born at DeKalb Medical. So I did not get to be born at Grady or any of the fun hospitals. And yes, I am bitter about it.
Do you consider Decatur in Atlanta? Because that's also a debate.
Some parts of Decatur are in Atlanta, or I should say some parts of DeKalb County are Atlanta. I really couldn't even tell you what part of DeKalb County I lived in. I was 2. My parents they divorced when I was very young. I can't even tell you what stretch of road we lived on. So I don't know if I lived in the part of DeKalb County that was Atlanta, or if I lived in a part of DeKalb County that was Decatur. I believe I lived in Decatur. I really don't darn know. But there are some parts of DeKalb County that are considered Atlanta.
And when you think about your childhood, are there things that like stand out to you as like, this was a uniquely Atlanta childhood experience? Like everyone that grew up when I grew up is going to know these things.
Yeah, it's so funny because I think I didn't realize they were uniquely Atlanta until I got older. I just thought everybody went to a middle school where like T.I. and David Banner and Fabo showed up and was born.
No, that's not normal.
No. And it took till after college for me to sit down and be like, oh, that wasn't everybody's experience. Like Fabo didn't come and perform Laffy Taffy in the auditorium, and like I said, that proximity to culture, to entertainment, was really unique. And I think it felt so ingrained in my schooling that it did not occur to me seriously until I moved to a place like Harrisburg, where it was so and Atlanta's segregated too. So I don't want to make the impression that Atlanta's not segregated, but I lived in the Black part. But I moved to a place where I was living amongst the white people in the town and realizing that Black people weren't having like this proximity to like Black culture in a way that I did in Atlanta. And it really was mind-boggling and such a culture shock for me, because I think I was so naive because I had grown up in this world and didn't know anything else.
I follow you on Twitter, and I saw that you've expressed on Twitter how, like, why aren't there like these media outlets really reaching out to like native Atlantans when they have media pieces about like Atlanta musicians or entertainment industry?
I mean, I wish I knew. I mean, I get certain answers, but I don't think they're really sufficient, to be honest. I have been working in Atlanta media for, several years now. And unfortunately, our local media landscape has dwindled. We do not have we don't have the entertainment coverage from a local landscape that we used to have. And it's continuing to shrink, with each passing month. And the national publications, for whatever reasons, do not feel like Atlanta is a place where they need to set up bureaus or have, even if it's not a 5-person team, even have one staff reporter here. Unfortunately, they just don't see the value in it. Or they say, oh, it's too complicated. We can't do that. We can't have it. And it's just so frustrating and so silly, because Atlanta is a place where a lot of music, a lot of film and TV, and a lot of entertainment is happening on a daily basis. And a lot of the entertainment that is happening elsewhere is sometimes shaped by what's going on in Atlanta. You have artists, and this isn't even from today, but I'm thinking the early 2000s, even, when like Nellies and artists from other parts of town were from other cities were moving to Atlanta to record and to live. Or even if you think of the 90s, Bobby Brown and Whitney Houston, we've always been a place where talent, even that isn't born in Atlanta and bred in Atlanta, comes to live and comes to play. You think of the 90s, and the Diddy coming here to party and things like that. Yeah. It seems really silly to not have a staff person here covering that, to have a dedicated person who is ingrained in Atlanta culture and can report on it, because it is so much of pop culture and so much of US entertainment and global entertainment. I don't know why. I can't tell you why they don't do it, but I just know that they don't.
The way Usher reps for Atlanta, you would have thought the man was born here. But that's true.
There's so many people who moved here, and Atlanta is ingrained in in who they are as artists, right? Like even T-Pain, right? When you think of like uniquely Atlanta experiences, I remember in middle school, a lot of the kids in my middle school lived in the same neighborhood as T-Pain, and he would like hire them to do odd jobs in the neighborhood. He was just such a like nice like neighbor where he would just let them do things. And this was the height of, this was like buy you a drink T-Pain. This was peak T-Pain, right? And he was just like helping the neighborhood kids with like odd jobs and things like that. T-Pain is not from here. He's from Tallahassee, but he's been in Atlanta so long that he feels like an Atlanta artist in some ways. And that's not to take away from the local influences that Florida has had on him as an artist, but it's also to say that obviously Atlanta has had an influence on him as well.
As I'm listening to you, I'm also thinking about how, for example, like I've read that Netflix has moved some productions of their shows to Atlanta, but that's because it can represent every town USA to them. And even like the music sometimes, like even though a lot of the roots in music today, like come from like Atlanta influence, it's kind of become like this universal sound.
For sure. I mean, and that's very true of so many productions take place here because Atlanta has like the urban scene where you can film in downtown Atlanta, but then you can also go to like rural parts of Georgia and seem like you're in more rural places. It's such a diverse landscape here that I think production companies can take advantage of that and film. Like when you think of Stranger Things, right? Like Stranger Things is able to film here in Atlanta, and it doesn't feel like Atlanta when you watch it, right? They film at one of the like popular malls here, and they're able to transform that in a way that you're not watching it like that's in Atlanta, but I do think you're right too, that the sounds that Atlanta artists have created have become so ubiquitous that they almost don't feel local anymore. They feel international, or they at least feel national, right? Because these sounds, when we think of trap music and how broad on a global scale trap music has become, these are things that have gone from feeling very like hyper local and hyper niche to feeling like ubiquitous throughout pop culture.
How do you feel about this, the globalization, let's say, of like the trap aesthetic, the trap sound, like trap yoga, trap this, trap that?
I would say I feel weird about it, but I also understand it. I feel weird about it because obviously like a lot of the communities that are impacted by the things that become global commodities are often left out of that commodification. They're not seeing the money or the resources of it. These communities are still struggling and suffering. So I feel weird about it in that way. Like I'm always going to feel weird to see like a random like white person partaking in a part of culture that is very, very much tied to like poor Black people. That's weird to me. But I understand it, right? And I understand that artists here and elsewhere have popularized something so much that you can't gatekeep it anymore, right? Like if it's so ubiquitous and it's such a part of popular culture, you cannot say who gets to partake in it and who gets to be a part of it anymore. You kind of have almost relinquished control of that commodity at that point. And so it's kind of like, well, you can't really do anything at this point. It's too far gone.
That reminds me a lot about the interview you did with Jalea Harmon. You know, she started the Renegade dance, and that just became associated with everyone but her at one point. And I'm thinking about just like the work that you've done, just interviewing like Black content creators like Jackie Aina as well. And for that part of your career, and like as far as like Blackness goes, what is your mission as a reporter? What types of stories do you want to get out?
I just want to be able to document. I always get frustrated when I look back on previous entertainment eras, especially when on a local scale, they just weren't covered well. And there's little historical documentation in papers of record of these things. And so I always want to create these trails for future journalists to have, for them to be able to look at this time and say, okay, like this was covered. I can, kind of get resources here, because I sometimes struggle to find that myself. So even if it's like interviewing like a Sean Bankhead, right? Mm-hmm. He hadn't really been covered locally. And I really wanted to cover him because, when we think about the choreography that he's done on such a huge, large scale, right? It's insane to think that he's still teaching dance classes in Atlanta, and we haven't covered him, or we haven't reported on that in a way that feels proper and appropriate. And so my goal is always to just be able to do that, to be able to create a historical record of these people and of their significance, so that future generations can come back and see, and that these stories aren't getting lost,
Do you feel like it's easier or any way more efficient for you to do it the way you're doing it as a freelancer, as opposed to like you working as like a staff writer somewhere? Like what are some of the pros and cons of like freelancing to get these stories out versus being a staff writer?
Unfortunately, it has been easier for me as a freelancer to do it, just because I'm not constrained in a way that, like, if I still worked at the AJC, right? Like some of the stuff I wouldn't be covering because it's not hyper local, or it's not uniquely tied to Atlanta, right? Like I cover a lot of Atlanta, but sometimes I cover a Black culture that's not a part of Atlanta as well. Right. Like I covered the Bill Pickett rodeo and the history of like rodeos for Black people. I may not have been able to cover that unless, say, Bill Pickett was coming to Atlanta, right? So I think of things like that. I don't think I would have had some of the opportunities, but also like, unfortunately, like local publications haven't, like that Lil Baby profile I did, they haven't really sat down and talked to Lil Baby on a local level. So I don't think I would have gotten some of the interview opportunities that I've gotten either had I not been a freelancer. It's just opened the door for me to diversify and for me to take on a wide range of projects that I don't think I would have been able to take on had I been at a particular publication.
Do you think that, as you look ahead in your career, this is a path that you're going to continue, like just continue kind of building your own thing as a freelancer?
I always say never, but I am personally doing so well as a freelancer and enjoying being a freelancer so much that you're going to have to convince me otherwise in order for me to go back to being a staff reporter. It's going to have to be worth my while. And, for the foreseeable future, I'm like working on a podcast. I'm able to kind of maintain my writing. I'm able to do some consulting. I'm able to do all of these things, and with journalism at the heart of it, but I'm able to take on all of these projects that allow me to diversify creatively. So that keeps me interested and passionate in what I'm doing, but it also allows me to tell stories in multiple different ways. And I really enjoy that. And I want to continue to try to build on that throughout my career.
What do you feel, or how do you feel about phrases like content creator? Because there are some similarities between like a freelancer or like that kind of lifestyle career that's not stuck to a 9 to 5, and the work of like digital entrepreneurs or content creators.
I don't have an issue with the term content creation. I think we probably should respect it a lot more. Because when I think of like the Jackie Inas and the Jaleas, right? I think what they do is phenomenal. I think we don't respect their labor as much as we should. And I think that if we respected the term content creator more, maybe it would make it easier for people in that space to do what they're doing.
Is there, I don't want you to give away everything that's in your mind, but is there like a story in your heart that you're like, man, if someone just gave me some money, I would put all my effort into making this story, this narrative happen?
The podcast that I'm working on now is that story. And I can't say too much about it yet. Hopefully it'll get announced soon. It's a project that I've been pitching for probably the entirety of the time that I've been freelance. So at least maybe 3-4 years. And I just got it picked up, or I just signed a contract for it earlier this year. And we're currently in production and working on it now. But that's the project that I just kept coming back to. And I kept saying, like, I just need somebody to see the value in this. And I just need somebody to give me a budget to tell this story, because I know it's a good story. My gut tells me it's a good story. And other people are telling me it's a good story, but they're saying like, it's a good story, good luck. They're not like putting the money behind it, right? Or they're not putting the resources behind it. And I'm like, I just need to find one person who believes in the story and believes in me enough to put the resources behind it and allow me to tell it. And so I'm really excited to be able to do that.
Congratulations on that. That's no easy feat.
Pitching is not, especially a big project like that, is not easy, but it's really taught me a lot, because like I said, I know how to pitch articles, but pitching a podcast is a whole different game.
When you have ideas, I'm sure you're the type of person that comes up with ideas of things that you could do. How do you know that this idea is like, okay, it's nice, but I'll put it in the back burner, and then this other idea is like, oh, I actually want to like execute this thing? How do you distinguish those?
It's the ideas that keep me up. It's the ideas that I just keep coming back to. It's the ideas that, and this idea in particular, I had done some smaller work related to this topic, and the response to it was just really favorable. It invoked a sense of nostalgia in people that I thought really spoke to something. But I'm also very fortunate that a lot of my very close friends work in entertainment and media. And I also have friends who don't, because I think it's important to talk to friends who work in the industry, and also talk to friends who don't know nothing about the industry, because they can gut check you and be like, girl, just y'all, it's nobody else. And so I've been really fortunate to have a small, close circle of people that are honest with me, and that'll be like, that you got something there, or that are like, that sounds lovely, but maybe not, Yeah. And so being able to gut check, and Tayari Jones was one of those people where like, I talked to her about this project earlier on, and I was like, I have this idea. What do you think? And she was like, good idea. What if you tweaked it just a little bit to make it like this? And she was right. And I tweaked it. And I feel like that really helped in the pitching process. And so I've been really fortunate in that way.
I can't wait to hear what this project is. I do want to ask a question. This is a question I'm asking everyone this season. Yeah. So it'll be around like the last question I asked you. Who, what, or where represents Black Atlanta to you?
Ooh, I think Black Atlanta is so different depending on what part of town you grew up in, depending on what area you grew up in, right? And so I don't know if there's one person, place, or thing that represents Atlanta as a whole, but I can speak to what represents Atlanta for me.
Yeah.
When I think of Atlanta, right, like I think of Outkast, I think of the Dungeon family, and everybody that comes from the Dungeon family. So that means Janelle Monáe, that means Future, that means even the people that are outside of the traditional organized noise kind of landscape. And then the place I always think of home, I think of Southwest Atlanta, right? Like that to me is home to me. That is Atlanta to me. It is a place that has produced everyone from organized noise to a Pearl Cleage and Tayari Jones to, like Mayor Shirley Franklin, or, it produced all of these people who have impacted various facets of Atlanta culture, which is, of course, influenced national and international culture. And to me, that's the place that I think of when I think of Atlanta.
My conversation with Jewel, as well as her new role as the editor-at-large for Capital B's Atlanta newsroom, has inspired me to focus my takeaways for this episode on the state of the American journalism industry. Capital B is preparing for its nationwide launch at a time where other Black-focused national news outlets such as The Root, Essence, and Ebony are experiencing varying degrees of turmoil and even closures. The hardships of running a news organization in an ever-fragmented and precarious media landscape are experienced by all in the journalism industry. However, Black-owned media companies do experience unique challenges. For example, ad sales are integral to the traditional news business model. In 2020, Black-owned media companies saw less than 2% of total ad spend, despite the fact that Black consumers represent 13% of the U.S. population. The Capital B nonprofit newsroom aims to circumvent this traditional, now outdated business model through a model that relies on journalism-focused philanthropy and small-dollar donors. In an interview with Politico, Akoto Ofori-Atta and Lauren Williams, who are the co-founders of Capital B, commented that philanthropy in support of journalism has nearly quadrupled since 2009, in part because the idea that journalism is a public good necessary for a healthy democracy is gaining footing. That said, 2009, and this is me talking, 2009 was an ominous year for the journalism industry, and a year worth reflecting on if we are to consider the future of journalism. The United States had entered the Great Recession, and newsroom employment had started to plummet in 2009. More than 100 newspapers closed during the first half of that year, and thousands of news workers lost their jobs. We saw then, as we continue to see today, that the traditional news business model, ever reliant on ad sales, was and still is unsustainable. It has been over a decade since, and the institutions of the journalism industry have yet to stabilize. The pandemic has only magnified the industry's long-standing issues, and a mass exodus of news workers is underway. The Wall Street Journal found that the Bureaus of Labor Statistics predicted journalism jobs would decline by 4.8% by 2030, after already shrinking from nearly 66,000 news analysts, reporters, and journalists in 2000 to 52,000 in 2019. The decline of institutions is giving way to the rise of individuals, with news workers pursuing more independent freelance work and gaining their own individual followings online through social media. Local newspapers are disappearing while national media chains are creating their own regional newsrooms. Capital B may be well positioned to survive the changing tides, though. Experimentation and new ownership models are sorely needed in the media industry, and nonprofits will continue to play an important role in the future of media. After all, public-funded organizations like NPR and PBS have survived this whole time, right? Black media outlets have always been necessary reporters of the most pressing issues facing the country. The players may have changed over the years, but the game remains the same. I believe that the future of media is Black, with a capital B, so we can only wait and see what the future holds. Best of luck to the National Capital B team on their forthcoming launch. You have just listened to a production of the Black in Real Life Podcast. The Black in Real Life Podcast is developed, produced, edited, and hosted by Anuli Akanebu. The music was graciously provided by Garth, whose single Wild can be streamed anywhere you can find music. The intro music for this season includes an instrumental remix of Welcome to Atlanta by Jermaine Dupri featuring Ludacris. Thank you for listening, and remember, the people you follow online are also Black in real life.